you somehow combine this old school, right, traditional art that a lot of people consider as dead art already.
Have you ever be on a regular piece of paper and then accidentally double tap on it? Like if you're drawing on something, do you like?
Yes. And
Okay.
even now when I draw on paper and I did a line that I not really like, I'm like have subconscious ones. I'm like, that's crazy.
No,
That's
no.
crazy.
What I would say is find some drawings of trees or people or whatever it is that you like, and then trace that and trace it again, trace it again, and then draw the same thing right next to it until you feel comfortable doing that. And
well, hello, my dear creatives, and today we have a very special guest. It's Joe Skibba. Joe is an architectural illustrator. He runs his own illustration studio, Depiction. And my goodness, how many awards of excellence did he got? His work has received international acclaim in the form of over 20 awards of excellence with the American Society of Architectural Illustrators. Joe combines traditional craft of illustration while also keeping up with the latest technological advances. And he also teaches with his online tutorials, live classes, and guest lectures. So welcome, Joe. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hi. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So my very first question is, to be true, when I first saw your drawings, your illustrations, I was like, oh my goodness, that is incredible, especially in this like century, in the 21st century. It looks like you somehow combine this old school, right, traditional art that a lot of people consider as dead art already. I can see it a lot, like on Instagram, they say that like watercolor in architectural illustration is like a dead art, and you combine it somehow with drawing on iPad, and it looks so like magnificent that I just can't take my eyes off it. So could you please tell us more about your technique? Like, how does the process look like? Do you first draw by hand on an iPad, and then you jump into watercolor, or you color in Photoshop? Because when I look at it, I'm just, how he did it, how you did it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a question that a lot of people are interested, have asked, like, how are you doing this? And, it isn't anything, I don't consider it anything difficult to do, but I think where the sort of stylistic representation comes in is because spent a lot of time drawing, traditionally and painting traditionally. All the work is done digitally now, so I'm drawing on the iPad, and then everything is done in Photoshop. The color work is done in Photoshop, but the base.
So coloring in Photoshop.
Yeah, you can color on the iPad. I just you have more control of, and it's faster to do it on the iPad. You have layers and files, and like you're pulling stuff in. It's just a lot easier to do it, on Photoshop. But there's a you can take it pretty far and fairly quickly, if you want to do the color work, right on the iPad. But if you're, it's the whole idea is that in watercolor you're painting light to dark, right? You start with a line work, and you're building up your colors and your values, and if you keep that mindset and you're choosing the right colors, whether you're painting with traditional watercolor or you're painting in Photoshop, it comes out very similar, looking very similar, because you follow that. If you were doing oil painting, you paint dark to light sort of thing, and in watercolor you do light to dark. So that's really the whole premise of it, is that you're looking for a watercolor look. We're using some watercolor file stuff, like whether it be a tree or a texture, so if you can pull in real watercolor things and sort of massage it into your work, that sort of moves forward the believability of the watercolor esque style. You know, and I actually think that we can actually do more with in Photoshop that you would never be able to do, you know, in traditional, you know, especially doing night renderings, and you know, if you want to do flares and like adjustments when the client calls and asks for like a billing color adjustment, you know, all those things are sort of easily manipulated in Photoshop.
Yeah. And this is like the biggest advantage, right, of the digital, because I remember when I was trained as an interior architect, and I remember this like beautiful process when you first set up like your canvas with watercolor paper, and you like literally stretch your canvas first, you do all that stuff, and then you start with the like pencil drawing. Then you can introduce like watercolor from light to dark. Sometimes some people love to start with color ink. By the way, I thought first that it is colored ink and not watercolor, because the colors are so vibrant. So my very first idea was that it is like handcrafted. It's analog. It's not digital what you do. And I thought that it is colored ink because it usually has more brightness, intensity of color. And then when I checked out your website, I'm like, wow, so Joe does it like first line drawing on iPad in Procreate, right? So you got all this information from your client, like photos. You probably use this SketchUp model, right? Then you do like outlining in Procreate. Then you transfer this image to Photoshop and start coloring with watercolor brushes, right? And you sometimes make a collage with like real watercolor effects or something like that, right?
You're exactly right. So you're starting with a model essentially from the client. So you're picking up views, and then once the view is set, there's quite a bit of setup once you get to before you get to the drawing. So whether it be, you know, cars, people, trees, you know,
shadows.
Yeah, well, the shadows sort of are nearly the last thing. So you know, might do like a shadow study initially, or you know, you're sort of thinking about like where's the light going to be coming from, because you're going to be drawing shadows on your, you know, on the drawing. You know, sometimes you can draw some shadows in there, and so you want to know where you're, you know, generally where it's going from, left or right, or where the sun is coming from. But yeah, so you start with a model, whether, you know, I'm using SketchUp, started doing SketchUp back in 2005. And, you know, the beauty of SketchUp, though, for me at the moment is that it's the entourage of library of like, you know, the people and the umbrellas and like having all of those little elements to stick into your model. So when you sit down and draw, you have people in there, and you have, you know, the mom with the stroller pushing the baby in there. Like, it's part of your setup file. So when you're sitting down drawing, it's sort of like a lovely experience. That up until the point of the drawing is a lot of work. So you're getting the model and getting all that stuff right in there, developing language for the architecture and intention and sense of place. If there's a story that, you know,
it creates a story, this narrative to your drawing.
So it's you said, and I did digital rendering for a long time. So I was using Studio Max, and we were doing video animation and photo, you know, photo montage. And then I sort of left the digital world to do this traditional media, and I worked at a company called Urban Design Associates, and we did a ton of drawing, and we did a ton of traditional watercolor, right? And we, you know, it was at a time like 2005, 2006, and the economy was good, and like we had at the company, we had a ton of work to do, and we would go on location and work with the public. And so you were, you know, you had to make strong decisions about your drawing, because you were drawing pen on paper,
right? You can't change really later on.
You did, like, you know, you could erase some of it, you know, but you had to make bold decisions and strong marks. And still, even with the traditional watercolor, you know, you can lift some of the color up, but like you aren't really making changes. So you have to make marks and then move on. So it was that history of like lots of repetition, and then making strong decisions about what you're trying to do. And so when you go back to the digital world, where you have you're able to make corrections and adjustments, you know, really it makes the process of adjustments easier, but you're
Mhm.
still in the same mindset of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make this line, and like, I'm not going to adjust it, like I'm just going to keep moving on. So yeah, and it's really the marrying of the digital world and the traditional world, and then
Yeah.
it's really like a true hybrid. Everything is in the computer, but it's hand drawn, which I consider analog.
Yeah,
Drawn
you
on
do it
paper.
absolutely beautifully. Yeah, you somehow you marry these two. Like some people have in their mind that these are like two completely different and even not like fighting with each other techniques, and you somehow marry them. And this is so, so beautiful. So it was like 2005, right? So almost 20 years ago. And then you opened Depiction Studio. It's 2017, right? So
Um,
almost 5 years, 5 years.
yeah, I left Urban Design Associates in 2013,
Uh-huh.
and I called it Skibba Illustrations. So it was just me. And then in 2017, I had a business partner, JJ Zanetta, and we had an employee or two. But we sort of Depiction shrunk down, and now it's
Uh-huh.
just me again. So, there's like a small army of folks that help me, whether it
Uh-huh.
be modeling or SketchUp or drawing. If there's more work that comes in, I just it's with the subcontractor sort of realm that
Yeah.
I try to do everything I can, and then when I need to pull in other people, there was a time where the thought was that don't do any work that you can outsource. That was sort
Hmm.
of like the model, like
Like delegate, delegate, delegate. Yeah.
yeah. So, and that was the idea of sort of building an illustration studio,
Uh-huh.
and having subcontractors to help out with that work. The problem arises that like if you were to like write your signature on a piece of paper, and you give to someone else and they write your signature, like it's never going to
Uh-huh.
look the same. So it's not it is somewhat difficult to sort of hand off work to other people when it's really a signature style. It's a stylistic thing that if I was to try to replicate someone else's style, like it's not going
Hmm.
to look like that. And so there's a balance, right? And so uh, the idea of having outsourcing work as much as you can, that works to some certain extent, and then it doesn't really become a viable option. And unless you're doing this too, right? Like I think the reason why architects would come, or planners come and ask for this, is that I'm doing it all day, every day, right? Can they
Uh-huh.
do it in house? Like, can they draw in house? Could they do a little watercolor? Yes, but it's not their primary focus. And so when someone calls and asks to do something, to have an architectural illustration done, you want to go to the person that's doing it all the time, because that's like it's
Yes.
like a tunnel. Like, you're going to do this, like
Focus. Hmm.
yeah, it's going to be good, and what you provide and what you get out, or like it's a completely acceptable resolution of what they're looking for. You're trying to
Yeah.
wow
Yeah.
people, and make sure that it's fitting within their project. But it's yeah, it's interesting that the hybrid process, and people looking at it and saying like, well, what is this, like,
Yeah,
the
like
water.
how you did it. Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
everybody's question probably in my head. I
yeah.
later will include, of course, for our viewers, some of your drawings, so they can also be
Okay,
in awe.
okay, yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
wondering, so your studio Depiction, you started it with the mind, with the idea of like hybrid work initially, right? Or you started with like analog, and then you realized that due to lots of iterations you will
Yeah.
switch into like iPad. How was it?
Oh, yeah. So in 2013, there was no Apple Pencil. There was iPads, but no
Oh my
Apple.
goodness, 2030. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
exactly. It feels like it's
yeah,
been
yeah,
forever.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And like the day
Uh-huh.
that it came out, like
Okay, yeah.
I had it. I had gone to the Apple store, and I was like, I had been waiting for this my entire life. Had tried other tablets and pens, and like certainly had the
Wacom, yeah, I used to use
icons and
Wacom,
like,
yeah.
and when the Apple Pencil was on the iPad, and like the amount of clarity and resolution and like dexterity, because when you draw on little leaf and trees and like other surfaces would sort of round off the edges, the dexterity of exactness was unrivaled. But you know, back to the studio thing, the whole point of the studio. I had been in 2013, I had been in a co-working space just to be around people doing something. You know, they really weren't any artists. They were like tech folks and writers and like but the idea of having a studio was to be around people doing a like-minded thing, and sort of feeding off of that energy and saying, this person's doing this, and that's interesting. Well, what if we tried this? And it was really like, you know, having people around and having employees, or like having a studio environment was to be to have something to go do and look forward to and interact with. You know, and then COVID happened and things kind of shrunk down, and I'm just here in my house office, and it's kind of boring.
We all got
It's
used to
boring.
work from home offices since COVID.
Everyone wanted to work from home, and like I spent my entire career thinking that I needed to go someplace, like get up, take a shower, go into an office and do work and then leave. And I needed that. And COVID taught me that I didn't actually do it. And so I'm home, and it's boring. I don't know, you know, it's
I believe all creatives, even if we are like introversial type of personality usually, right? And I find that for me, co-working is also like a number one probably thing to boost my creativity, to like because it's just so inspiring to be around creative people. They are like from all walks of life, right? So these like calligraphers, illustrators, some of them are like marketers or whatever, and you just got so inspired by these people around, and you managed to do so much more work done when you are in a co-working. So I hope this also be like a hint or trick to our listeners. Go find a co-working place nearby, and you will be like so excited how many new ideas will come to you, new maybe partnerships and so on. And probably, by the way, this beautiful idea of charrette came to you when you were in a co-working, because I've seen somewhere on your website that you did a design charrette working session. Can you please tell us more about it? So is it like it's like a group of architectural illustrators, and each of them sketches like for 10 minutes on a project, and then they discuss it as a presentation? Or how does it look like?
Are you familiar with the word charrette, or in the architecture?
I heard about it, but I've never attended a charrette, and I find it's like very, very exciting. Yeah.
So in the case of my experience with the charrette, there's one illustrator, and then there's planners or architects, and the mayor, or like the term charrette is a French word, right?
Yeah,
so,
French.
So when you went to architecture school back in the day, you would work really diligently, and you'd work and you draw your stuff, and then the professor would go around with this cart, right? Charrette, it means cart.
Yes.
And
he will pick the drawing, right?
Take the drawing and put it on the thing. And so the charrette is like a fast-paced work environment. So in the case of my experience, the charrette experience is you go with a team on location, and then you're working with the community to develop their plan for their local site. So it's one illustrator, and then architects and planners, and then it's sort of a give and a take of like, we're going to do some plan work, do some illustration work. Maybe the illustration work informs the plan, and then maybe the plan informs, the plan definitely informs the illustration. And then the as the general public, though, looking at a plan, no one really understands what that means or what that, I look at the plan and like, how big is this space? Like, what does it feel like? Like, how many trees are you going to have in there?
Yeah.
You don't really get a sense of that. And for someone who's unfamiliar with the plant, like the general folks, the general public, they want to see the 3D perspective view.
Yeah,
rather than,
yeah, because they can understand and process the information through that. Yeah,
right, and they can see themselves, right? Where if you were there and you had the opportunity to like take photographs, you would have the local folks that live there and use them and put them in the drawing. So if they come to the meeting at the end of the charrette, they might see themselves. I would have a joke and be like, I would take photos and people would be like, well, what are you doing? I was like, we're gonna make you famous. Right? Put you in the picture. There was a project last year. It was actually at a golf course, and the client had me come down to the golf course, Pinehurst, North Carolina. That was sort of the first time just to do a long distance on location work. But I was taking photos of the people, on like the putting green, and one person had a knee brace on, right? So she had a knee brace, and she made it into the drawing.
Wow.
And everyone always comments on this later, be like, oh, we love this, is like so real, like
realistic.
She's got a knee brace. I was like, yeah, that's right, because she lives there. She's part of the golf course. So
wow, so you actually like immerse your drawings with like real people, real life stories, and maybe that's why like developers and like your customers, they really so much in love with your work, because it's like real. It's not like some random images of person from like internet that you Googled, but these are like real stories, real lives, like genius lossy, right? On location. That is so interesting. That's great.
I think that whenever you can, certainly Google people and put people in from Google. But whenever you can, the local getting, it just feels more authentic, whether it be
exactly
the types of trees or the people or the cars or how big the streets are, like all those things sort of like read, and it's once they're familiar to the people looking at this, then it feels more acceptable. I don't know if we wanted to talk about it, later either, but you had mentioned it earlier about watercolor being dead. People saying like watercolor being dead.
Yes, I saw that like a lot on internet, that watercolor like architectural illustration is considered like as a dead art. And that like made my heart broke. I'm like, no, it's not that. Even though I understand that indeed a lot of people these days, they opt into like digital sketching, even without having a basic background in like perspective understanding, basic drawing, which I personally believe is quite a mistake to do. Because if you know how to draw, if you understand the concept, if you understand the structure, you can simply like put it onto like digital format, right? You can work in Procreate, Morpholio, like anything. But if you jump right into Procreate or like iPad, it's so easy to be consumed by all the possibilities that these apps provide you, right? Like endless amounts of brushes, endless amounts of effects, and you simply can be lost in all these like endless opportunities. What do you think, Joe?
Well, in the era of Lumia and Enscape and like easily renderable files, and like it's producing great stuff. Like it looks great. It was that was the exact reason why I sort of left the digital rendering world and like went to go learn this hand-drawn, hand-painted craft of a thing, because I think when someone might say watercolor's dead, it's partially because no one's doing, like there aren't that many people doing it anymore.
Exactly.
So I would
like
say
we are losing this craft because not a lot of people are teaching this these days, right?
It's more like it's like a dying art rather than it is dead. But it comes to, and I just had this conversation with one of my favorite clients, like literally yesterday. And you can do, if you model all this stuff and you do Lumion and you present this like lovely digital rendering to your client, the one's first response is like the design is done, right? When you see a digital rendering, it looks like it's done.
Yeah.
There's no room for interpretation. It was like, well, what do you need? What do you need? You know, as a onlooker, like, what do you need me for? Like, what input are you getting? Like, it's like you're done with this. And the beauty of the hand drawn and the watercolor is that it leaves room for interpretation. You could have a complete design, or you could have no design. But the viewer is looking at this, and they see it. It's a different emotional response to it.
Exactly.
They can move around and be like, okay, well, I can see this. I can see where this works. I'm able to give input because it's not, you know, cast in stone. It's not the building on the corner for the project, and it's done. You know, it's interpretation of architecture. Certainly an interpretation of environment and like an ideal world of the sun hitting the shadows and all of that. But you know, you need the right thing to present to your client at the right time. So it may be a Lumion, you know, VR experience, or maybe it is just a watercolor sketch. And what I'm finding is that there's like, I have two levels of finish. There's like, I call it a colored sketch and then a colored rendering. And the colored sketch is looser and softer, you know, fuzzy architecture. And then a rendering, which is more detailed and more finesse.
Fine-tuned,
Doing a lot of colored sketches because folks are in-house, have the Lumion capability. So they have that sort of finite completeness, right? And what they're looking for to show their client is something looser, something more interpretive. And so I would never say that watercolor is dead because I'm busy, and you know, other folks that, you know, that I know that do this, like, they're busy. So it's a dying art, but I wouldn't say that it's dead. And it's mostly because of, you know, you want something different to show in the initial phases of your project, right? You want, like you're saying, like, it's just like a concept. So you just want to show them something that represents the idea, and then use that as a stepping stone to then go on and finalize the design, and then do your Lumion renders.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I had at least 5 clients. Some of them were like developers, architects, even a design magazine came to me, and they literally, they presented like complete 3D Studio Max rendering to me, like beautiful visualization. Even though I personally, I just hate 3D Studio Max because I used to work in it. I mean, I'm not hating like the renderings. I admire them because of their like, they're so realistic, right? And you can literally show how the space will look like. But when I used to like work as an interior architect and obviously like study at the art academy, I just hated this program in particular because it was like so time consuming, and you just immerse in all these endless presets. And when these clients came to me, they're just showing me like, they're, Olga, here are the visualizations. Could you please do a couple of sketches for this? And like, what? Isn't it like other way around? So you first present the sketches and then you proceed to more fine-tuned drawing. And they're like, no. Yeah, they say like, we need to sell this project to our client, and we do need like your sketches. We need, because in sketches there are like emotions, there are personality. And I'm like, I was so wowed. I'm like, okay, I could do it. And it was so easy for me because like all the perspective is done, right? So you just put all the energy and like emotion and fun stuff. You don't need to bother about perspective. And it was so interesting to me. At least one of the projects was like by London architects, Ceylon architects, and they did this beautiful restaurant in Swiss Alps. And they later emailed me and they like, Olga, we sold our project only thanks to your sketches. Can you believe? This is huge, right? This is huge. That's why I also don't believe that it's like a dead art. It's more that not a lot of people do these days. That's why, Joe, I believe that it's so wonderful and valuable that you keep teaching. You're teaching, right? You're a guest lecturer. at different universities, you, I know I've seen on your website that you do live classes, right? Watercolor classes. I'm wondering if you also offer like online courses, because probably people who are watching us, they will want to learn from you. Could you please tell us more, like how we can learn from you? Do you offer classes? Like, tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, I will say that I think it's really important that architecture folks do this, at least to some extent. I did a 6-class seminar at Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh, and we just finished it up a couple weeks ago. And the students, no one drew on an iPad. No one had any facility really. You know, they had done architecture. You know, really comfortable drawing, but like the amount of, you know, once you start drawing on the iPad and Procreate, it's sort of like a slingshot, because it's like the amount of possibilities that what you have here with you, like at all times, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of a game changer. And then being able to draw and then put color and sort of go in a straight line to the end point is, we used to teach the class, and it was traditional, right? Because it wasn't like request a student to have an iPad to do a thing is kind of a big ask. So we just said, okay, we're just going to draw on paper, and then we're going to color in Photoshop. You know, essentially everyone has Photoshop.
Yeah.
But the process of getting the drawing out of, you know, the model and on to paper, and then draw, and then scan, and then patch and get it back into Photoshop. The folks that actually, you know, at the time, 1 or 2 students were doing the iPad, like they were so far ahead of the guys that weren't doing it. You know, eventually it just made sense. But this past year, all the students essentially had an iPad, and by the end, it was sort of like light bulbs, you know, going off on it. So you were asking like how does one
how we can learn from you, from you.
I think it's absolutely essential, because they're not teaching it in schools really, you know. So I've been wanting to for years to like have, say, a master class of drawing and painting, and I just don't ever get around to it. So there isn't like, I wish I could tell you, go here, there's, you know, 2-3 hours of class and files, but that doesn't exist.
But you do have a YouTube, right? You do have a YouTube tutorials.
I do have a YouTube.
Yeah.
I do have a YouTube. But you know, I always thought that like just making a video and putting it out on YouTube, like what does that really do? Like, how does that help someone? If I was to make a video for how to do a digital watercolor, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can sit down and do a watercolor. You know what I mean? Like if I made a YouTube video on like traditional painting, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to sit down and do a watercolor painting. And so I think for me, it's more of like I want to say like a measured way of like trying to approach it, more than a 10 or 20 minute YouTube video where like you sort of are hitting on things. And so I don't know really what the best process is. The only way, you know, that I learned how to draw and paint was from being around, you know, I always had mentors and folks that were doing this at a higher level than myself. So I was always absorbing from folks. And so if in my mind, like even if you made a tutorial, the only way you get better is showing it, I think, to someone that can give you feedback on that. So if you're just sitting by yourself in your own at your own desk in your own tunnel, like how are you actually moving forward as an illustrator? And like how do you know if it's what you're doing looks right? Because you probably don't have the experience to know what is correct or what is not correct. So I think it really does have to be in my mind, like a classroom situation where it's a education and then presentation and feedback on that, so you can like grow and understand what works and what doesn't work and the reasons why behind it. So
absolutely. Go on. Yeah, please.
No, I just like I've always like for years been like, okay, we're gonna make videos, and like it's hard to like break down the thing that you do every day, right? Like to break it down and say this is like in small repeatable systematic steps, like this is how you do it. It's hard, and then you have to put yourself in front of a camera and talk and sound intelligent about what you're saying, like
sound intelligent.
right. So you would say something or like that's not right, then you're going to repeat it, and then it doesn't sound right because then you're repeating it. And so
obviously when this is like an online course situation, of course you want to be like have a teacher mentality, right? Not only like be an amazing artist, but also like improve as a teacher. But that is so beautiful that you told about this live masterclass, live workshop with the students. I believe it's also so essential that people gathered together, right? And they can see what other folks do and they can learn from each other. And it is so fun that some folks had this little instrument, and it just showed them how much faster you can work these days when you have an iPad compared to when you're more stick to a more traditional process, like drawing, scanning, adjusting, again scanning. Post-production in Photoshop. Because I introduced iPad to my online school of sketching and to my like sketch commissions only when I got a baby, because I'm like, I don't now have that much time to work on the project and scan it, post-product it, and plus with markers and watercolor in my home office, like when your little one sneaks into your home office, like these markers and watercolors like all around the place, and you just can't sometimes find the correct brush, even though you just put them, I these days put brushes on the very top level, so not able to reach. So in my opinion, like drawing on iPad, one of the biggest advantages if you consider career as a sketch artist, because I know a lot of viewers are like beginners in sketching, some of them are architecture students, and majority of them, they want to do like the same as you do. For example, they want to become illustrators, architectural illustrators, sketch artists, and they want like to present it beautifully, quickly, time efficiently. So in my opinion, iPad is great for sketch commissions because you can adjust quickly to clients' wants and needs. He wants to make changes and you quickly do it. You don't need to like scan everything. So that's incredibly, like, probably to me that's the biggest value. But sometimes I miss this like visceral feeling, pen and paper, brush. I'm wondering if you also have this nostalgia about these like good old years, like 20 years ago when you used to work in this architectural firm, and you used to like draw analog, pen on paper, color it like in real watercolor, right, with real color watercolors, not like from Photoshop for that.
I get a question. Have you ever be on a regular piece of paper and then accidentally double tap on it? Like if you're drawing on something, do you like?
Yes.
Like every once in a while,
so fun. It is subconscious these days.
It's just like,
and that is
I can't
and very often, I remember. So I've been using iPad for like sketch commissions since 2020. So it's been like 2 years. And even now when I draw on paper and I did a line that I not really like, I'm like have subconscious ones. I'm like, that's crazy. That's crazy. And that actually I believe that spoiled me, because you achieve for the most beautiful like dynamic line. And when you, after working for a while on an iPad, you go back to your paper and you start sketching, you're like, oh no, I'm losing my like touch, I'm losing my skill.
You know, and this is gonna
So
sound dumb,
funny.
but I'm always like so delightfully surprised to like, you know, when I get a real pencil and put it on real paper. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this actually, I actually like,
sound, right? Like,
it's like so much better. It's like
yes.
it's you know, it's like the iPad's an interpretation of drawing. You know, the actual real drawing. It's just like, oh yeah, this is so much better.
Yeah.
But one thought on that too, though, and I had this, I think, from the students in this last semester. I think that you know, you can watch a video and they can see me do a thing, and you're like, oh, well, this is going to be actually fairly easy. I'm going to get an iPad and like I'm just going to start doing this, and like, that's not necessarily so, right? Like, the thought is like it's going to be easy because I have an iPad, but in fact, it's going to be slightly harder to draw accurately because you're on the iPad, because it's once removed from an actual pencil on paper. And I had it like back in the day, I had a really smart friend. He was into robotics and stuff, and like I showed him the iPad and he was like, oh, this is great, I'm gonna get an iPad. And then I saw him the next time, he was like, Joe, like I did my drawing on the iPad and it turned out like crap. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, Sid, did you draw before you had an iPad? He was like, no. And I was like, okay, well, so you didn't really draw before, and you thought because you had an iPad that you were just going to be able to do a drawing. I was like, you have to take it within the context of like it. Is it easier? Is the process easier of going from drawing to color computer to iPad? But like it actually is slightly more difficult to draw on the iPad than if you were just to draw on paper.
I agree.
Right?
I completely agree. When I first put Apple Pencil into my hand and I started drawing, I actually didn't like it. I just didn't like it. And then I realized that I do need to like educate myself into like Procreate, because the very first step was Procreate. And I thought, okay, I know how to draw. Then it should be like pretty easy. So it was indeed quite easy if I do like very loose sketches, like something quick. But if I go for like visualization, and I'm like, where does this tool? And I'm like, okay, Olga, you should go and find some online course on Procreate. So I took an online course, and then I started to feel more and more comfortable with Apple Pencil, because I remember like this, when my iPad with Apple Pencil arrived, I was like over the clouds, over the moon. I'm like, yay, finally. And then the next day I started and I was so upset. I'm like, I don't really like it. I invested like in that thing, like a couple of thousands of dollars or like whatever. And like, I don't really like it. What if I won't like it at all? But when you like start learning this like program and you understand some basics, that actually becomes so much fun. And now I'm so happy that I overcame this like fear and kind of plateau, and I didn't quit. I didn't decide like, okay, that's not for me, this is not my thing, like Procreate, Morpholio, concepts, whatever, I don't want. No, I started to learn that, and I believe that for a lot of people it can be an insight, because I personally, I know a lot of artists, architects, who are like, I ask them, do you draw on iPad? And they're like, no. They consider it sometimes as a like bad thing, not like a bad thing, but like not real art or something like that. So they like, we just don't like it. And I'm like, did you like actually learn to draw on it? So that's so interesting, because sometimes it looks like it's a battle, like analog versus digital. That's why I really love David's sketching retreat idea, that he also married these two concepts, and like each of us can find something like valuable from it.
Into your thought on your point of like it's not real art. I don't consider the like architectural illustration, like, is it artful? Yes, but is it art? Like,
it's more like a craft, right? Craft.
Are you gonna hang it on the mantle above your fireplace? Like, you're not.
By the way, some of the clients, they do hang it on their walls in their offices, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
print it and they hang it. Yeah.
Okay. So that, yeah, sure. Right. Right. I, but I, when it comes to illustration, it's like a product. It has a shelf life, right? And so once they build the building or whatever, like they're never going to use it. Like they might use it maybe in their marketing, maybe on their website for a touchy-feely piece. But once the building's built or the project's moving forward, like, it's disposable, so
Yeah.
it's not, I don't, it's not precious to me. Like you're going to do something, and then move on. It's and then you go back and look at your work that you did before, and you're like, what was I thinking? You know what I mean? It can be this way and can be so much better. But I consider it like bathroom art. Like you might hang it in your bathroom, yeah, certainly not in the living room. But
Bathroom art.
it has a commercial thing. It's a product, and certainly there's a price tag too that goes with the architectural illustration, that you don't get from artwork. If you're a working artist and you sell something for thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
That's a good day, right? You know what I mean? Like, and you're doing the work in the hopes of selling
Yeah.
it. And in this case, we're doing work that's tied to a commercial building that's worth $1 million or $50 million or whatever it is, and like the fee for the architectural illustration is like a little blip, on their budget. It's like,
Yeah.
you're gonna do this huge building and like this small little
Exactly.
thing that but like you said though, like they got that project because of the sketches that you did. And so that fee, whatever it is totally worth it. And in fact, maybe you should charge more, or it's like, oh, it's just a sketch. Like when people say it's just a sketch, that means that they want it to be inexpensive. Which I hear that, but someone would say, well, how long did it take you to do that? It's like, well, maybe it took me a couple hours. Where you're like, okay, well, how much did you charge then for that? It's not a time-based thing. If someone asks, what is your hourly rate? Like,
it's not
I know what I what it is, but it's not something I discuss, because it's not about hourly rate. It's about value for the project and what they need.
Exactly. If this little sketch, it sells your project to it sells a project to like an investor, a client, how much does it cost? Like $1 million, right? It's like, it reminds me of this little story about Pablo Picasso. I'm not sure if you know it or not. Yeah, like Pablo, he was like in the market, and one lady, she just approached him and said like, Pablo, I'm such a like huge admirer of your work. You're an amazing artist. May I ask you to do just a little sketch for me? And he like, my dear lady, of course. He just sketched it in like 2 minutes and presented it to her. And she's like, wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. And she started to leave. And he's like, sorry, my dear lady, this is like $30,000. And she's like, what? You spent like 2 minutes on that thing? And he's like, yes, I did spend 2 minutes, but it took me 30 years to learn how to do this in 2 minutes, right? So he is exactly the same, because very often I'm lucky I've never got asked by my clients like, Olga, why do you charge so much for like architectural sketch, like even if it took you like half an hour to do? Luckily, never. But some of my students, especially beginners, they have this mindset that like, if I did it like in like 1 hour, and they have this idea of hourly rate, right? So like, for example, like $200 for an hour or something. But they don't understand the entire process, that first to find a client or to client find you, it also takes time and energy, right? So you should have a beautiful like either website or Instagram. It's like a system, so it's not an hourly rate. And sometimes you can have like, how many like clients per month, like 4, 5, 10. You don't want to be like completely exhausted by the end of the month because you worked like on 20 different projects, because the amount of information we want to process when we are like an architectural illustrator, a sketch artist, is like gigantic, it's enormous, right? We like understand the place, like construction perspective, like the technique that we will do it with. So it's definitely not an hourly rate. And yeah,
Well, and to that point though, right? You know, when I think that when I feel like I'm making money is when I'm charging this, right? And I only spent this amount of time to do it, right? And so, and that's where the digital stuff comes in handy. Where if you traditionally, right, we would in the old office at UDA, we would take a day to do one painting.
Yeah.
And we can do the same version of that in a couple of hours. So we actually are able to do twice, 3 times the amount of work in this time period. So that time efficiency actually allows you to be you know, more productive in your income. So you know, and certainly too, if you were able to hire someone to do SketchUp stuff or to set up your Photoshop stuff, if you're able to you know, have folks help out, then you're actually spending your time doing what others can't, whether it be the drawing or, you know, the final colorization of it. And there was another thing that you mentioned that brought up a point. I forget what it was, but yeah. Oh yes, I remember. The idea that lots of times when folks, and I do a lot of urban design drawings. Yeah. And if you're in the urban design world, they're in the master planning phase, right? So say, here's the plan, here's the roads, here's where the building goes. We're gonna do ground floor retail and in residential 4 stories above. And it wants to be, you know, traditionally based with some modern elements, glassy elements on the building. And so the ask from the client is, here's this master plan, and what we wanted is we wanted something that looks realized. So we're the drawing, as an illustrator, you're inventing place, you're inventing architecture. And so that skill level of, you're actually designing buildings, right? So I feel like I've drawn more buildings than architects have drawn buildings, because their projects are 6, you know, months to years. And so we're doing, you know, I'm doing, you know, 3-ish whatever perspectives a week. And so I'm drawing buildings all the time. But that's why people come to, say, an illustrator, because they don't have everything worked out, and they know that they can give you, you know, a basic form, and what they get back is a pretty picture that's fully realized, and they can trust in the illustrator that you are designing the place and the buildings feel right, you know. So you've seen lots of drawings where you're like, I'm not sure why this isn't quite working, but like it makes me feel weird, like the buildings aren't right and the people aren't right, but I don't know what it is. But I'm gonna say something like, oh well, as a client, you know, this isn't, like, this person standing in the corner isn't right, but like what is it that they're really saying? What is the solution that we need to do to fix this thing? But my point is that we're creating from basic massing model to complete architecture, and that's the skill, right? Where it's designing and architecting the space, and you understand urban design principles, so you use all those elements to create something, a story, and something evocative for the viewer to look at. And that's really the power. So let it be drawing on paper, an iPad, or Photoshop, or whatever. It's the creation of something from nothing, right? And you know, if you were going to start a painting, if you were going to start a painting, you got this like white blank canvas staring at you, and it can be intimidating, right? And if you need your process, you need to go through your process. And the true sign of a professional is, like, whether you want to do it or not, you go back to your process and sort of like can come out of the tunnel on the other end and have something, you know, acceptable for.
Absolutely. I'm so agree. By the way, I had my previous guest on this podcast was Dalibor Zurila, and he helps architects to work smarter, to do better presentations through visuals. and we had a very interesting discussion on this topic, that
Yeah.
when client comes to him and he sees that this client has a really bad architecture, because by background, his background is architecture, and he sees that the client comes with a really awful project, and by established series of questions, by the methodology of his work, client actually shifts the architecture idea. He changed the architecture, and I believe this is also the power of architectural visualization, right? When you present something to a client, you're like, you visualize it on paper, and I'm sure there were cases when client, when he saw his architecture on paper, and he realized that he wants to like shift something, to change the facade, change the architecture, add this box here, take all like this box out of there. Were there situations like that in your practice?
I'm sorry, ask the question again.
I'm just wondering if a client, when he comes with a like setup architecture that he was pretty sure that it will be like that, but when he saw the drawing, the hand rendering that you did, he decided that he wants to change something in the architecture because he saw it due to like the high level of like craft of your work, and he realized that he feels this space now, and he feels like this architecture should be a little bit different, for example.
Yeah. Well, I consider it like a collaborative process that that you know, conversation, that we are evolving the design that they're working on, because lots of times we're like in the initial parts of the thing, and because we are drawing, and because there leaves room for interpretation, that we can do different things with the building. But it's also to say that it's not like the building isn't necessarily the focus of the image. It's everything around it that creates space. So it's less about, you know, the corner element of the building and more about what's happening within the image.
Yeah,
and
because you primarily work with like master plans. It's like a city, like city.
Yeah, or like it's not just like, certainly do the, you know, the smaller building on the street corner of a building, but you know, lots of times in size small to medium sized firms, they have folks internally and handle that internally to do those things. It's sort of like the medium to slightly medium firms that really reach out. The larger firms, you know, they have like in-house folks doing all kinds of amazing digital rendering stuff. They still come, like the Gensler will still come and say, let's do you know, a sketch of this project.
Yeah.
So you know, it's, but back to your question though, it's like it's a collaboration, and it's a back and forth, and what, you know, you listen to what they're saying, and you present it in a way, just, and you know, always in my emails, you know, I say please comment as needed, you know, because some people would say, well, like, I don't want to offend you, but like this doesn't look good. I'm like, it's not, like, you're not going to offend me, right? Like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like, if it doesn't suit the purpose for what you're trying to do, then it doesn't suit, like, let's make it right, you know?
So it's best to change it at the preliminary stage of drawing than to change it when it's like final hand rendering.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's, and sort of like, you know, when you talk about the architect that goes through their process, like I have the process of the illustration. What we try to do is not go backwards in those stages. So like, whether it be view, prelim, line drawing, final color, those steps, like we try not to go backwards. We can, and I tell them, like, if you change the design when we are done with the color, like it'll be an additional fee for that. You know, I was like, I rarely ever charge additional fees for things. Because we get consensus along the way, right? And so it's like you get to see it in process, and we're making adjustments, and by the time we get to the end, like you've seen it enough and we've talked about it enough that that there's no surprises, and that if if we are making design changes, it's coming from a different source, and in that case, then then there's additional fees in it. But if you're a good client, and you come to me on a regular basis, like what am I going to do? Ding you for a couple $100 for like $500 for some? Like I'm not. We'll just
Yeah, I see.
put it all together and send it off, and we'll run it off on the next project, right? It's more about the relationship of
exactly. And it's the process, right? It's the process. It's like synergy, and you work it out all together.
Yeah, I like that word, the collaborative synergy. That's like that's the best part, because like I consider myself a people person. It's the same idea of like going to co-working, to be around other people, like working with a client in the collaborative process. That's the most enjoyable part of the whole, you know what I mean? Like let's do something cool or interesting.
Yeah, some fun stuff together. Yeah, Joe, so probably my last question for today. So this podcast won't be like super long for our viewers. What one advice would you give to a beginner in architectural illustration and sketching? Like what it would be like, for example, let's say that a person, he wants to consider this as a career, and what would you recommend to him or her?
I think the biggest thing would be just the amount of repetition that you're able to draw. And for me, the most important thing in the renderings are trees and people. Yeah. And so understanding the structures of foliage, layering of vegetation and plants, and how you draw that outer edge and in the different line styles that you're doing. Whether it be a tree or a flowering shrub or someone standing in a park, like the building is the easy part, right? Because it's
like a box. Yeah,
it's a box. And
box in perspective. Yeah.
If you were to do one thing, and that would be to draw some trees every day. So it's almost like it's muscle memory. If you're having to think about what your tree shape is wanting to do, it's probably not a very fluid form, like your Picasso example of like it took a long time to like do this thing, because it just looks like it just comes out, like the tree shapes and the tree strokes and the foliage and like how it all forms. It has to just come out, and you only get that from repetition. And so how do you do repetition? Like what I would say is find some drawings of trees or people or whatever it is that you like, and then trace that, and trace it again, and then draw the same thing right next to it until you feel comfortable doing that. And
it becomes almost automatic, right?
Yeah. And even for myself, like if I haven't drawn for, there might be a week or two in between, or a month, when I go back and sit down and you're rusty. You go and I've been doing it for a long time, and I come back and be like, oh well, this is like, it's not coming out, and it's only after a little while of like working and drawing the trees that you aren't going to see in the foreground that your hand starts to warm up. And so if you aren't drawing all the time, and now you're going to sit down and like draw a tree, you're going to be even more rusty because you don't have that experience behind you. So being able to draw on a regular basis so that you get the fluidity and muscle memory out of your hand, that would be the one thing that would help.
That is so valuable, and it's so interesting because literally, Joe, yesterday I did exactly that. I felt like my hand is a bit rusty after drawing on iPad, and I just went out in a nearby park, and I took my sketchbook and I started like sketching the trees, their foliage, and it was so. I realized like how much I love it. And this is so relaxing. It naturally comes back. Yeah, that's incredible.
But that's because like you had it before. Like it was there. You just have to like bring it back out of yourself.
Yeah, it's like muscle memory. Like professional dancers, they also know it. It's like muscle memory. So you don't need even to turn on your brain. It's like your hand does it automatically.
Right. this is like a little story from my childhood, but I lived in Ohio, and our neighbors across the street, his dad was an engineer, but like he drove, I'm gonna call it a race car, but it's a drag. He would do drag cars. Do you know what a drag car is? Okay, so it's like a quarter mile long, and you start at one end, you go as fast as you can to get to the other side.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And so that's in America, it's called drag racing. And so there's different
Okay.
cars. There's like, you might have seen it. It's like a really long car with like big wheels and in the front and like a big fat engine. Anyway,
it's like in Coca-Cola ad, right? It's like endless big truck with.
I don't know.
No.
I don't see any ads anymore. But okay, so here's my point though. The neighbor across the street was this, amateur drag race guy, and he would he switched over. He had a motorcycle for a while, he had a Mustang for a while, he had an actual dragster. But I remember distinctly, like I was fourth grade. He said, Joe, he would talk about you do this strip and you have to shift really fast, right? But you only get 10 seconds to practice at it. And it's not like you're doing that 100 times. You get like a couple of times down this thing, and you only have a couple of times to practice this, the shifting and all this stuff. And so he said, I would lay in bed at night and shift, like in my mind, my car, because I was trying to get my body and my mind in a set that like I had practice in it. And so if you're able to do that I'm not talking about drawing trees while you're
before you go to bed, like in your mind.
No, but it's the same kind of thing. Like if you're able to practice it and get it in there, it is muscle memory. And so this amateur dragster guy like gave me advice for the rest of my life. So
yeah, definitely practice makes better, practice makes perfect, right? Thank you so much, Joe, for this interview. Thank you. And by the way, thank you for honoring like this traditional craft of watercolor, and that you keep teaching people and like you keep doing what you do. That is so valuable in our day and age, I believe. Yeah, so thank you so much for this conversation.
And wherever this interview goes, and if anyone sees it, like I appreciate you doing this, because I think that the proliferation of like getting folks aware of it and like getting it out there, the community of architectural illustration, I think is the most important thing. It's the most important thing, is having folks.
So this art will not be dead ever, right? It won't be considered as a dead art anymore.
You know what it'll do? It'll just be more valuable, and then and less people doing it makes it more valuable.
Maybe it's gonna be like with antiques, something like that. This concept of antique.
Better with age. That's
antique art.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you so much for this interview.
Pleasure.